time is now 7:12, and I'm going to call this meeting of the Old Saybrook Board of Education to order, and we'll start by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item on our agenda is the audience of citizens this evening. Trent, is there anybody?
Nobody online.
Coming online? You can get past that. Next, we'll look at the reports for student reps.
All right, so I don't know if Elliot, is Elliot online?
It's not online at the moment, no.
Okay, so I guess I'll take this. So for the meeting of November the 8th, to start with kind of the club section, the NHS induction ceremony for the juniors this year is going to take place on the 21st of November, I believe. And the senior NHS students will be each selecting a member of the junior class and giving them like a short presentation to induct them into the, well, I don't know if that's what you call NHS, but that's going to be taking place on the 21st. The showings for the school play are on November 10th, 11th, and 12th. The play is Murder on the Orient Express. And from what I understand, rehearsals are going well. Everything is looking great for those show dates. Academically, the first quarter of the high school ended on the 31st of October. Honors Band has this requirement of participating in at least one official audition. The first of the two main auditions is on the 19th of November. The new social studies teacher, Diana Nasser, finished her first week last Friday, and from the feedback I received from students, everyone seems to like her a lot. I feel like she's adjusting to her role well, and she's very helpful in getting the grades transition from Mr. Glover into her new teaching style. So that's just what I heard. Student feedback from the schedule change has been getting increasingly positive, which is good to hear. It seems like as the year goes on, more students are starting to adjust and adapt to their new schedule. Mondays are still widely polarized from students either loving having the shorter classes and like being able to breeze through the day, or hating having the 8 periods and everything crammed into one single day. But from what I understand, there's not much we can do to kind of avoid that. So I think for now, that's fairly solid. For extracurricular kind of things going on, Field Day and Spirit Week took place, and those went well. There were a lot of, at least from what I understood, school spirit seemed to seep throughout every hall. Like everyone was on the different days, everyone was dressing up for whatever the theme was. Like on Tropical Tuesday, I saw a couple of like beach floaties and stuff like that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So for Field Day, that was the Friday before Spirit Week. I think students started to have fun in the beginning of the day, but towards the end, I feel like they were getting bored. But I mean, after COVID, I don't feel like it was a bad field day, so to speak, just because it's hard to transition into like a semi-normal kind of style after like 2 years of not being able to do that sort of thing. For homecoming was the Friday at the end of Spirit Week, and it was combined with Westbrook. In total, there were about 350 students between both the schools, which was very, very interesting. Feedback from the Old Saybrook students about having Westbrook there was mixed. At first, at least in my personal view, there were those like individual groups between the two schools, but towards the end of the night, everyone seemed to truly like come together and have a lot of fun. And I mean, as I mentioned on the report, like the atmosphere really seemed like a true kind of homecoming dance, which I thought was really cool. The 8th grade step up day took place, I believe it was last Wednesday, if I remember correctly. And the feedback from both the high schoolers and the 8th graders was widely positive. However, in a lot of the cases, well, not a lot, but in some cases, I heard that the 8th graders shadowing these different classes was a big distraction to like the classes going on. But as I mentioned, that's not to say that the experience wasn't productive and insightful to a lot of the students, because there able to kind of see a high school day in action. I feel like that was definitely very helpful, like more so than not productive at all. For the sports report, girls soccer ended the regular season 4-8-3. However, worked their way through the Shoreline Championship and made it to the finals championship game this past Friday, where they unfortunately lost against the Morgan High School 2-0. That was a tough game from what I heard. Boys soccer wrapped up an amazing season, 13-1-2. For the first seed in the Shoreline Championship, but were unfortunately knocked out in the semifinals after a rough game against Morgan again. Field hockey had a pretty solid regular season as well, finishing 9-4-1. And they made it to the Shoreline Finals Championship this past Thursday. However, they were defeated in a very tough game, 1-0 against North Branford, which was decided in the final minutes. It was a good game. OSW football has currently been having a pretty tough season. And after their loss to Coventry this past Saturday, they sit at 0-8. And cross country had their state championship at Wickham State Park on the 29th of October. Old Saybrook High School student Parker Cook finished 3rd overall in the state. That season is over and indoor track starts later this month. And any questions for me?
Thank you.
To the question, just a reminder, if you can come to the Connecticut Association for Boards of Education conference, we're doing a session on student representatives on boards of education. So if you're available, we'd love to have you.
What's the date on that?
It's the 19th of November. It
Okay.
would be, I think, from maybe 9:30 to about 10:30.
All right, let me put a reminder in my phone.
Okay, for training.
You can just shoot me an email if you're, and I can register you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Sure.
Correspondence, Karen?
Yeah, we just have one piece of correspondence. It's the Cape Liaison newsletter, just outlining all of the events coming up. So I'll just pass that around to the board members. Thank you.
Okay, the meeting minutes. I actually am looking for a motion on the minutes.
Have a motion.
Discussion.
I'm sorry, who's the second for that?
Alan, thank you. Questions or discussion on the minutes? Seeing there's no questions, discussion, I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Thank you. Education issues for discussion, our Eversource grants.
Sure, I'll get it started, sure, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Bachman. We have an opportunity to accept a grant that our teacher at Old River Middle School, Tim Wood, applied for through Eversource. And a grant of this size does, by policy, have to come before the board for acceptance. So with that, Dr. Bachman, can you talk a little about it?
So he's applied for this particular grant. The grant is going to be used for the Old Saybrook Studies. If he gets it, it'll be used for Old Saybrook Studies, which is a newer course, which we introduced. I think this is the second year now that we've had it. As they've expanded the curriculum and the ideas, what they've been trying to do is follow the students' interests and attach that and connect that back to our town and the community. So as they continue to work with the students, they've noticed and found additional things that the students were interested in, including going to different places, which requires transportation. So that was really the majority of what they were planning on using this money for if they do receive the grant. So that would give them the opportunity to connect with different community members, business leaders, see some of the science or historical things in town as well. So.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the $2,500 Eversource grant as presented.
Second.
Second by, again, discussion, questions? Yeah. Steve?
There's no other anything tied to this grant, we don't,
Like
no
in-
matching,
in
no,
kind services or-
yeah, no, nothing, right? It's just, this is $2,500 for us and we can do what we want. Perfect, that's it.
So in the cover letter, you said they, excuse me, they are the recipients. So,
I think that we don't know for sure.
but if it,
Yes.
it just said the recipients, and I was like, oh, it was like they kind of just sure.
Any questions? Seeing that there's no other questions, I'm gonna call for a vote. All those in favor of accepting the motion?
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstentions?
Congratulations, Grant, to apply. That's a lot of work.
Okay, next, we have a field trip request by, I don't know how to pronounce it, NEPA.
NEPA.
Do-
Yeah, I'll get it started. So Mr. Plotkin is here, Mr. Taylor is here. They actually have the next two items, and we'll take them one at a time, obviously. The first one is about the New England Music Festival. This is something that our music teachers are very generous with their time and energy and bring students to every year. So with that, I'll turn this over to Mr. Plotkin and Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, these are trips that we've conducted in the past, as Jane said. So Mr. Taylor, I think, is going to speak about both the trips on the agenda. So I don't know. Okay, so
One at a time.
okay,
Yep.
Mr. Taylor.
All right. Yeah, about both of them. This is actually exciting and also a bit of a relief because these are two overnight trips, music festivals that we used to do every year. And that tradition was interrupted by the pandemic. So now we have an opportunity to resume. And it's just a little, another little piece of normal coming back at us, which is very nice to have. NEMFA is an acronym for the New England Music Festival Association. And this year's festival is being held at Woodstock Academy, Woodstock, Connecticut. So right here in the state of Connecticut, but barely. And the auditions for this festival, I kind of mentioned this, that the auditions for this are in December. And there's a good number of kids trying out this year. And I'm sure we'll have some. So I don't know for sure how many kids are going to go because they need to audition to be accepted. This one is 2 nights, 3 days. We usually share a bus up there with Valley Regional High School. I'll see if they're going this year. They stay in host homes up there. So NEMFA has a history of doing this. And their policy has been they cooperate with whatever local police department town that's hosting it. And the police department runs background checks on every family and every member of the household of every family that volunteers to host the kids. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but we appreciate that. And most of our kids usually when they go, they'll all stay together in the same place. Let's see. Oh yeah, we send Mr. Milton up there the whole time in the hotel, and it's been a good opportunity for him too to talk to music educators from all over New England, and it does draw from most of the New England states. I think Rhode Island is a holdout, but everybody else shows up. Let's see. I think that's all for that one. Does everyone have the materials that I submitted with the dates? Is that?
Yes.
All right, and I won't go over that. So that's the New England Music Festival, and we should do it one at a time.
I think actually before we go there, I'm looking for a motion.
So, yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the New England Music Festival field trip from March 23rd through March 25th as presented.
Any questions, discussion?
Question. So actually Woodstock is near where I work, Killingly. So
Oh,
can,
that's right.
so is that an opportunity? Can you get tickets during the week?
Yes, the concert, there will be 2 concerts on Saturday afternoon, so I don't know if you're on Saturday afternoon. but
It's kind of a
yes.
beautiful area.
Yeah.
It's our academy, is beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Bigger than it used to be. They bought the campus of the private school, that closed next door. It was a magnet school.
Mhm.
It's gorgeous.
So do you get tickets? Do you have to contact Woodstock Academy or call you? Or?
When I figure out how they're selling tickets, I'll let you know.
Thanks so much.
Anyone get a question? No. Any other questions or comments? Seeing there's no questions or comments, I want to call for a vote. Approve. All those in favor? Aye. So opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Okay, so now we'll look at,
Again, we'll turn this back over to Mr. Taylor. This is something he's used to doing.
CMEA is the Connecticut Music Educators Association. And this is sort of a second round festival for our Connecticut kids. John mentioned November 19th, that's in a couple weeks, the audition date, which is for the Southern Region Music Festival. There's 4 regions in Connecticut, music educators. We're in the Southern region, same as Meriden. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but here we are. So it's a 2-step process for the kids. They have to audition and be chosen for the Southern Region Festival. And if they attend, then they are afforded the privilege of auditioning for the All-State Festival. Then they can go and do that. We only ever had one student who then proceeded to audition for All Nationals. Went to Texas for that. But we'll go to All-State this year, I'm sure. This is again being held in Hartford, and it is an overnight deal where the kids will go and they'll stay at the Hartford Convention Center, and there's a concert there on Saturday. And these are very dedicated music students from most high schools in the state. It's a fabulous opportunity, and it coincides with the Music Educators Professional Development Conference. So for those of us chaperones that head up, it's also a chance for us to network, to talk to our colleagues from around the state, and to go to some classes, which are often taught by music teachers from around the state. Let's see. This overlaps March and April this year, includes April Fool's Day. I'm sure nothing will happen. And the festival, CMEA provides chaperones, so they do ask for music teachers to stay overnight with the kids. And of course, every chaperone that's watching our kids overnight is a certified music teacher in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you. Before we have any questions, I'm looking for a motion to.
Because I'm gonna eliminate the acronym. So I'm gonna move to approve the Connecticut Music Educators Association All-State Music Festival Field Trip from March 30th through April 1st as presented.
Second.
Second by the discussion questions.
Question, so there's a fee, it looks like it's attached.
There
Students
sure
have to
is.
pay, and how do we do that if there's a student that can't afford to, who wants to participate, but doesn't have funds?
We are very fortunate to have a music department scholarship fund or financial aid fund. It's a student activities account. If I say anything wrong, it's a student activities account, and it's been mostly filled up by, I mean, you always came when we would do those the concerts in November and had been at First Church
Exactly.
over here on Main
Yeah.
Street.
Yes.
And I would put the marching band hat out. People put donations in.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
well, we have enough money in that account to take care of kids who might need it. And usually our process there is to look and see who's receiving free or reduced lunch and extend aid to them, and then also by request or petition.
Thanks so much.
Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, on average, how many students are we sending up there?
Some years just one, years as many as 7. And it really has to do with student interest. And in a small district like this, it's odd. Sometimes we get like a wave because they play off of each other. If there's like 4 or 5 kids that are really into this, can support each other and practice real hard, and sometimes they go in a group. So I would anticipate this year 2 or 3.
Any other questions?
No.
There seems no other questions. I'd like to call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? Great, so moved. Thank you. Thank you. Next, we are going to have a written presentation.
Well, Dr. Goss has prepared for us at the board's request, in answer to a question that a parent who came to our board meeting asked, which was about, what decisions are made about what gets taught in the classroom. So really that is a question of what is our process for creating or adopting curriculum? To what degree is that prescribed by the state? Is that prescribed locally? By our local process, which Dr. Buff will go into, and to what degree do teachers have individual freedoms to choose material to teach? And so Amity is going to walk us through all of that, and you're going to see that there's a lot of influence from outside of our district. And I don't really know if that's going to be a surprise to you, but you've heard me talk about legislation, and increasingly we see curriculum being legislated. So this is a timely and important discussion that Dr. Buss has prepared, and she's going to walk us through it. And maybe we could do questions at the end. It's only 8 slides, so it shouldn't be, okay. And our other administrators are here because you may have a building specific question and they may be able to support the answer as well. So Amity, if you would.
We go right to the next slide. Thank you. So I was very excited that all of you wanted to hear more about curriculum. It's an unusual request and it was delightful. So these are the 3 questions that we'll really focus on tonight. What is the impetus for adopting or revising curriculum? How are the resources chosen? And who chooses the resources that end up in our classrooms? And I think that those 3 questions are sort of at the heart of the request. Can we move to, yes, you're really good. So we always focus on our strategic plan and what are the connections between this question and this presentation and our strategic plan. I highlighted some of these words in blue because they are some of the words that impact our curricular decisions, making sure that students are challenged, making sure that we are focusing on helping them achieve their learning and life goals, and making sure that school is a culturally rich experience for all kids. So sort of looking at each one of those goals and the way that it impacts curriculum. We have in Old Saybrook a program planning flow chart, and I can actually pass a hard copy of it around, but it's linked in your presentation if you're online or if you want to view it online. This flow chart actually predates my return to Old Saybrook by a couple of months. It was created by a committee and really was in response to a curriculum decision and helps to define how we make all of our different decisions. So you may notice in the flow chart that there are references to non-curricular things because, for instance, if Julie needs to buy a tractor, then she would also go through a very similar process for making decisions about how that would happen. And it all starts with what is the need? Is there a need? And so the challenging part here is that there is not always a need that is identified at the local level. We would love to say that all of the needs start with what's number 1 here on our list, which is that student data indicates that we have a need to make a change. That's really where all of these things should begin. But the actual reality is that there are a large number of other things that play into these decisions. So number 2 is that standards are adopted, revised, or updated. And Mr. Rivers, if you could just click on the academic office, you will get to see along the left-hand side, it shows you all the different types of standards, and you could go down, it goes down pages and pages and pages. You can see all the different standards and directives and sort of ways that we are directed by the state. And in some cases, they're federal standards that were adopted by the state to make decisions about what will happen locally in our classrooms. For instance, I linked here the, can you go back one more? I drive all the time and I have that same problem. It jumps on you sometimes. The Healthy and Balanced Living Framework, it was actually the most recently adopted set of standards. That is the health and PE standards adopted this past summer. They hadn't been updated in about 25 years. And they decided it was probably time to do that. And when they did that, they created a brand new document that is almost 90 pages long. And basically expected immediate implementation. Now, what's lovely about these standards is that they did an amazing job connecting them to the legislation that drove a lot of the changes that happened here. And they did give us a gap analysis tool. So we can take what they gave to us this summer, and we can look at where does that match what we're already teaching? Where do we have gaps? Where do we have overlaps? What do we need to change? And what's nice about these standards is that they actually did that. Often when we get new sets of standards, we're creating that from scratch. But recognizing that they also embedded all of the legislation that impacted the changes that happened here. So not only were there national standards that they were focused on, but there were Connecticut statute changed and required specific things be included in those standards. And they actually list all of the statutes that are related right in the new standards. So it's actually a very helpful document. And if you have the opportunity, it's worth perusing. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of statutes that prescribe specific either subject matter or ways of teaching that really do change what we do in classrooms every day. If you could click on the prescribed courses of study, this is actually the government website that shows us all of the things that must be taught. And again, it goes on and on and on. And some of them, I think, might surprise you. That some of them are a little obscure and potentially a little surprising, thinking about that being included in a P12 education. But there they go. And they're very specific, like screenings for specific types of cancer, to really broad things like histories of whole groups of people. So there are sort of a wide variety of impacts there.
And if I could just add, Amity.
Please.
So this is the actual public act that keeps getting amended pretty much every year. And it was PA 10 blah, 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 and it's now been amended, I want to say, in almost every single one of the last 12 years. And it has never been to take things out. It has always been to put things in and to be, in my mind, more and more prescriptive about what we teach.
And so there are mandates that come from the state, or actually flexibilities that come from the State Department of Education. For instance, they told us that, they were trying to not regulate this with such specificity, the courses that students would take in order to graduate from high school, which was very quickly usurped by 12 more things being added at the legislative level. So there's sort of this tension between what happens between educators and lawmakers in terms of how that drives curriculum.
Could you just talk for a minute, Amity, about the term standards, curriculum, and programs? Because even educators sometimes get those confused.
Yes, that is currently hotly debated.
Yes, it is.
Standards are the documents that tell us the specific sort of topics that students need to cover. They tell us specifically what students need to learn and achieve within a subject area in order to have mastered that subject. Curriculum is sort of the how to get there, the how to do that. So, in math, if you need to teach fractions and you have specific standards around the types of fractions that kids must be able to manipulate and the ways in which they must do that, the curriculum is how you're going to teach children to do that. And then programs are a vehicle that supports the how, but they don't take the place of curriculum. And you will probably hear this a lot in the news, where there's the debate about whether you need curriculum if you have a program, or whether a program is a curriculum. And that is very hotly debated. I would stand on the side that curriculum is necessary even when you have a program, because they're not the same. They really are not the same. And I have yet to see, in 25 years of being an educator, a program that includes everything or can reach every student. So it really can't be just a packaged program and you call that good and you're done with it.
And very often programs, 99% of the time, programs are created by a vendor who's selling a product.
Yes.
And you probably, if you went to school anywhere near the time I did, you know that most of an awful lot about Texas and California because they did state adoptions. And so I learned a lot about Texas. I didn't learn a darn thing about Connecticut because they know who to sell to.
Yes. So along in that same vein is there's sometimes Department of Education guidance that comes along. And again, this was legislated, but then the Department of Ed was charged with choosing, they were actually charged with choosing the sort of methods that we would teach, that we would use to teach early reading. They chose to identify 5 and now 6 specific programs to teach early reading. And so we then have to respond to their approved reading programs list. We have until July 1st to adopt one of these programs. And as you can understand, that doesn't match our budget process. That doesn't match our program planning flowchart, which requires pilots and investigations and checking on how those programs will work in our context. And it doesn't take into account the fact that we have very successful readers.
Based on
Right.
data.
Right,
Exactly.
right. So when you start right up at the very top of our program planning flowchart, where is the need? We don't have an identified need other than, in this case, we have been tasked with making sure that that happens. So-
what superintendents are working on, if I could just interrupt,
Please.
because this is an update we
Yeah.
wanted to give you anyway. We met actually on Sunday morning, the board of directors for CAPS met to respond to a response we got from the State Department, because we sent a letter to them saying, we think this is unwise. We think this is not something that every school district, the price tag is up to $100 million to be spent next year for all of us to purchase one of these programs across the state. And so we are trying to push back and say, communities who can demonstrate that they have the components of a balanced curriculum and reading instruction should be allowed to continue to use the programs that they're using. We're not arguing against the science of reading,
Not at all.
that it should have all the components of phonics and comprehension, and all of those things that we teach, but it doesn't have to be these 6 programs which are created by vendors who are selling a product. And I'm not speaking against their program. So we are pushing for an appropriate waiver, and also short of that, at least a year's extension, so we can go through our process. Thanks, Amity, for letting me.
No, thank you. I appreciate
Fresh on my mind.
I appreciate the update. And finally, another way that we identify a need is when our graduation policy is revised, and you all have direct contact with that because that is your policy. And we do have to make changes to curriculum sometimes because of that. Then when we decide that there is a need for any of those reasons, we look to form a team to make a determination about what we'll use. And that is depending on the size of the need, the size of the individual sort of tool that we're looking for, changes the size of the team, who's on that team. So for instance, if a teacher recognizes that, gosh, kids really just don't know how to use commas anymore, that's a very small sort of an adoption process with a very small team. It's that teacher, maybe the teacher who teaches 1 grade up and 1 grade down, and the instructional leader from that department. And they would look at that. They would look at sort of a couple of choices, try some things over a period of several months, and then decide, okay, this is the tool we're going to adopt for that, and share it with the other partners on the team. But then many of you have experienced something as large as our adoption of the Bridges mathematics curriculum or program. See, it's very easy to do. When we adopted that program, we actually did a lot of research first to determine whether or not there was a need. Then we determined which programs had the largest research base of the best success rates with children in lots of situations. And then we piloted them locally, because what happens in our context here in Old Saybrook is not necessarily the same as that national sort of norming process that they went through. So we looked at that, and we chose Bridges because actually what it came down to, the results in terms of achievement were very similar between our 2 programs, but we talked to teachers, we talked to parents, and we listened to kids talk about math. And there was a very clear difference between the 2 programs at that level, at that qualitative level. So we made the choice to go with Bridges in mathematics, and that has been such a phenomenal success for us that I feel like that really speaks to the strength of this process. See, Jan?
I converted you to that.
It really is a strong process, and that included all kinds of representation from all kinds of places, because it was a huge, big decision for us. So depending on the size of the decision and the number of students impacted, the size of the team, the length of the pilot, the number of programs or curricula that are pieces of curriculum that are piloted matters. So that process continues. As I say, there are pilots. And then when we find the best resource, we look at all of that data, qualitative and quantitative, make the choice, do an adoption. Usually the piloters train their colleagues, but if that is not appropriate, given the circumstances or the size, then we do pull in other training. And then we adopt as needed. So the last slide talks about personalized pathways, which you see personalization in our mission statement. You see personalization again in our strategic plan. And we recognize that in order to really achieve that vision of a learner that we have here in Old Saybrook, we need to be able to personalize. So while we do have some programs and we do have written curricula, there are opportunities to meet the needs of the kids in front of any teacher at any time. And that's based on both their needs and their passions and their aspirations. So making sure that we are able to support them in their ultimate goals for learning. And a lot of times students are making those choices. So a lot of times when we say who chooses the materials in a classroom, especially at our high school level, but all the way through, we're really turning to children and asking about their interests. And we are having them, in many cases, having the opportunity to choose either from a set of resources or they're bringing in many cases, their own sorts of ideas. We also use a lot of online resources with our technological adoption. We use a lot of digital tools. And those are not identical day to day. That's part of the good thing about them, is that we buy, like a 6-year subscription and they update for us, unlike a textbook, which doesn't do that. So those things all are sort of flexible and meet the needs of the kids in any classroom at any given time. And that is it for my presentation. But
Thanks, Amity, very much. I just want to add one more thing, because one of the essential questions was about teacher autonomy. And I know you were just speaking to that teachers need to be able to pivot and flex to the interests of the students in front of them, or current events that might play into it, depending on what they're teaching. And so that is where educators, professional educators, have an opportunity to use their favorite poem or to bring in a contemporary topic or an author who perhaps is, making a name for him or herself at this point. And so that does happen. That happens in all of, I'm using English language arts, but it could be music. It could be, you could have a bunch of, a lot of women in a high level math class, a lot of young women in a high level math class. You might want to focus on female mathematicians, so there is that, and we support that and celebrate that. We do ask if they're making big decisions, like I'm going to use a brand new novel, that has to go through this process. It has to go to some subgroup of curricular representatives, certainly their instructional leadership team, certainly conversation with Amity, before anything that large is adopted, but individual one-off things that can be copied or downloaded. They understand what the standards are for our district. We have had people at times use things that caused, kind of a dust up, particularly at the high school. And when that happens, there is a conversation with the person about the climate and culture of the community, the district, the developmental appropriateness of material, depending upon the age of the students. And obviously high school students can be exposed to more varied and more mature things than any other students. I think that was the one thing I wanted to be sure that we
yes,
covered.
thank you.
Any questions?
Just quickly, just circling back to the whole reading. I'm so frustrated even hearing it, because I understand that there are districts in the state that need more support and guidance, but we're not one of them. So are you hopeful that they may reconsider their position? I mean, we have a proven track. You researched extensively reading programs years ago, and we settled on a program that I believe addresses the needs of a variety of different kinds of readers.
We have a
Including
lot of
dyslexic
data that
readers.
suggests that
Yeah.
our students are actually increasing in their levels of achievement, particularly at the elementary level.
So exactly. So why is the state, why do they do this blanket sort of mandate that everybody has to?
I will share with you my perception of it, and the perception, I think, of a lot of my colleagues. Certainly the folks at CAPS that met on Sunday all seem to be on the same page about this. We are, my understanding is the state of Connecticut is second in the nation in overall reading scores. In our K through 2, we are only 7th in the nation. Still nothing to be ashamed of, but certainly room for improvement. We're second behind Massachusetts. Massachusetts does not do a required set of adoptions. So you can choose whatever you want. They incentivize you to use certain ones that, again, are follow the science of reading with all the components. So that's sort of context. The legislators created law last year saying that we would all adopt programs that, curriculum that would be teach reading following the guidelines of the science of reading. So one of those very comprehensive, you have to do it all. The reading wars have been raging for years. So if you're in education, you've known about the reading wars forever. Whole language, phonics. And I remember when I went through my reading program, that was this huge debate going on. And even then it seemed ridiculous because you don't teach anything one way, right? You top down, bottom up. So that happened at the legislative level. The State Department of Education then formed a committee, and I think I would describe it, and this is not a criticism, as it kind of got carried away. All of a sudden they were approving programs. I don't see that necessarily as part of the legislation unless I'm missing it. It got to the point where they wanted it to be prescriptive enough to support places who maybe have a revolving door on teachers or lots of new teachers. And so this blanket adoption is what came of it. There was such pushback right away that they created a waiver system, which you can apply to not have to adopt. Originally, they said that the program that we use would certainly not be accepted, so don't even try. They've backed off of that position. They're now in a position of you can apply for the waiver and submit all the pieces of the different programs you use, which is what Old Saybrook does. We don't have one program. We use Teachers College, but we also use Foundations and a number of other programs that our professional educators have chosen and feel is the best way to teach reading instruction to our students at this time. So now we're in a position of we probably will be able to submit all of that and apply for a waiver so we can keep that program. By the way, the program that we use, Teachers College, is used pretty widely across the state by many, many districts. The programs that were chosen by the state, there are 11 districts using it. So
That's something right there.
right. So we are still scratching our heads, but I can tell you that through lots and lots of meetings, some of them quite difficult, we seem to be making some headway. At the very least, we are going to apply to have another year to really consider this and to pilot it the way we pilot it in Old Saybrook, any new program. And we also will apply for the waiver unless we find that one of these programs is absolutely fabulous and we were wrong and we should be adopting one of them.
Actually, I'm gonna call on George. George has his hand raised on the screen. George, can you hear us?
I can. I just unmuted myself, so hopefully you guys can hear me. Thank you. So a couple of things. I mean, one, thank you, Emily. I mean, that was just an outstanding presentation, and I truly appreciate that. I guess that it's probably more of a comment than a question, and that is just and I think in some ways Jan has already addressed this. It's just the complexity in terms of what you guys have to face to try and match curriculum to what you try and teach. And so, I'm going back to the slide that you showed a few back in terms of how you determine what the needs are, right? Your first one was student needs. And then, the third one down is what's mandated. And it seems like on this list, the third one is probably the number one, right? Which is quite unfortunate and probably addresses some of Karen's point, right? That is just, we have to meet state needs. And so, but then actually I wish you had not moved all the way back, because I think your final goal is to trying to personalize learning for everyone. And so it feels like to me anyway, that the curriculum from the state has set a very tight sandbox that you guys have to try to play within, and that you guys just do, from my opinion, a phenomenal job playing within that sandbox. I mean, I still remember a presentation that David Plotkin gave several years ago when he was still a scientist, and I think he was talking about creating a battery out of a pickle. It was just an amazing presentation. And so it was just, but it was the beginning of showing, how he personalizes learning for different people and so on. And at that point, I was already amazed in terms of what the complexity you guys have to go through to try and come up with different ways of teaching and learning. And then now to basically do that within a sandbox that you have to do in a curriculum, I'm beginning to appreciate the difference between curriculum and programming. It's just an incredibly difficult task, and I cannot applaud you guys more for trying to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
I have a question, Jan. Things come before the legislature, people bring them up, different things to address. So were there districts then perhaps that were not providing successful programs, reading programs in their district? And that's why it came up to the legislature?
I can't answer
Just
that.
curious,
I've heard
yeah.
multiple stories of how it came to the legislature, so I don't want to venture
Yeah.
a guess as to which one is accurate.
Right.
I do know that when the bill came forward, I read it and wasn't terribly alarmed by the language of it. As a matter of fact, only 2 superintendents went to the hearing to speak against it. I didn't see it as problematic necessarily. I thought for sure what we're doing would be okay. Because the legislation was less prescriptive than what came out of the State Department of Education. And so that's sort of our point, is we believe there's a bit of an overreach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think, and Kate had brought it up and people were just like, what?
CAVE, AFT, CEA, CAPS, everybody is trying to understand what we're doing.
You have a question?
Yeah, so if I'm trying to come back to where I believe having this presentation was based on the parent who came in and brought in some information.
Right.
We really still haven't addressed that. You kind of talked briefly about it, but there are definitely in the world and in the country some very hot topics.
Mhm.
And there are people that are passionate on both sides,
Mhm.
right? And it's about finding, my opinion, I'll take it for what it is my opinion, is that we need to find that common middle ground. How do we, as a district, make sure that we don't have these extreme points of view on either side being put into the classroom? I mean, in this case, had that parent not come forward, I never would have known about it, never would have asked questions. What other safeguards that we have in place that this isn't going on in another classroom? And I briefly look back at, the 2020 elections when I had contacts with some people in the high school and hearing stories of there was only one point of view that was allowed to be discussed about politics. And that was very disappointing to hear, that there should be both sides and having to have conversations of, well, I can understand that point of view, but you need to hear both sides. So there isn't one side that's always right. We need to make sure that as a district, we teach how to have an agreement that we disagree and find that common ground. So it's kind of twofold, it's while there's some ideas that are valued in those extreme points of view, we need to be able to listen to both sides of them. And if we're only teaching one side, or we're only talking on one side, and that's, so the real question is, what are our safeguards to prevent these extreme points of view from entering in our classrooms without a balance?
So that's a good question. This is number one. So anything big that is adopted goes through this process. Sometimes an abbreviated version, as Amy said, if it's something small, sometimes the full process, and if it's a course or a full curriculum, it's coming here. But there are a number of educators involved in the process of adopting. The other thing that we say to teachers all the time, and you have Mr. Plotkin was recently a teacher, Mr. Chad, I don't want to put them on the spot, but we do say our opinions as educators is not what we build our classes on. We build our classes on allowing kids to voice their opinions, especially take a social studies class or even an English language arts class, even science. And you have an issue, could be genetics, it could be manipulating and I can't think of the word, improving DNA and genetics. athletics work, you know? I think that is a great topic for a high school, an advanced science course. I think it's great to have the kids talk about the ethics and the science involved. What I don't think is great to have the teacher voicing his or her opinion. Our professional certificate comes with a professional standard, and it talks about that. We should take very seriously the responsibility that we're standing up in front of a room full of impressionable people, and we want to give them a platform to engage in good intellectual debate and dialogue, and wherever possible, teach them how to do that really well, but not to enter into the conversation ourselves. So when that has happened and we've become aware of it, their supervisor has dealt with those in a one-on-one conversation as a personnel matter.
So I guess then to modify my question, if we do have this, how do things get past this? That's, so if this isn't working enough to prevent those instances, you know, so I guess that's more my question. So if it happens, why does it happen? How is this not, how is stuff getting through this? If it's not being evaluated by this?
Yeah.
Then is there a flaw in the flow system somewhere?
No, I think it's typical, more so certainly at colleges and universities, but I think it's typical that teachers in the classroom have some autonomy. So I may be teaching elementary reading, and I've got a program in front of me, let's say, but I might still go find a book in the library that I think would be particularly good for this group of students because they've expressed an interest in something, or we're having a little behavior issue in the classroom. Now let's move that to the high school. It could be there's some hot topic going on right now in local politics, and I'm teaching social studies, or there's a big debate roaring about something really controversial as like this Hurricane Ian was caused by climate change. There might be a great reason for me to just kind of keep the standard that I'm told I should be teaching. I still have to teach that standard. We talk about the standard as the anchor. It ties your teaching to something that we said we would teach. But I might use different resources than I did last year because there's this hot thing going on now that will generate great conversation. When you give that kind of autonomy to people, they will sometimes choose something that seems okay to them, but isn't widely accepted as okay in a particular classroom or the community. If we were going to police on the front end every single one of those, we would take away everyone's autonomy. They'd have to run every article they thought was interesting and the kids might like, every poem by us. I think we would certainly lose teachers because that would not feel like there's any creative opportunity. There's no art in that teaching anymore. So instead, on the rare occasions when that's happened, and it does happen, those are individual conversations, the building level supervisor or the curricular director, or if it gets high enough, the superintendent, which really hasn't happened in the whole time I've been here, has to sit down with that person and say, okay, this was either not developmentally appropriate, or this caused a great stir. Like, it's not being sensitive to the kids in your room. There were kids in your room who were bothered by this. That's why we encourage people to talk to the teacher first. We encourage kids to talk to the teacher first. We know sometimes that's hard. And if the kid can't do it, then we encourage the parent to talk to the teacher next. You know, tell the teacher, my son was very uncomfortable when you were talking about blah, blah, blah. Let them know that. If that fails, then you've got the principal. If that fails, then you have Amity or me. So there is a process. We will continue to have people err on one side or the other. But they're always addressed. Sometimes they're addressed pretty extremely. That has happened in 10 years that I've been here, and sometimes they're addressed with you can't just go off on your own with something that big. You need to put something that big, that controversial through a process. So I think we have a nice balance of this is the flow chart. We adopt where we have to. We write curriculum where we can. But we also have to give some freedom and instruction. And then when we get these situations that go too far afield, we address them. Yep.
I thank you, Jamie, because a similar question what Stephen had brought up, and I think you answered it wonderfully. Amity, great presentation. You know, really, I think it's important for a board to understand this. I think it's important for parents to understand the differentiation between standards, curriculum, and programs. I don't know that they have that level of detail, obviously, but I think if there's opportunities to educate parents around that, more opportunities, this is a great one. To Stephen's point, there was a question that came up from a parent, and this is a great way to address it. So I, for one, really appreciate the explanation on the checks and balances, and that also appreciate that the state, does some things, gives us some mandates. Sometimes they don't fund, but that allow us to apply for waivers, and we can, really make a case. And I think we've got a great case in what we're going to be putting forward. So I wish you well. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that waiver process.
Sure.
So thank you for the presentation, and it seems like a very good system.
Actually, George, you had another question, George?
No, Jen did a great job answering that question. I mean, I was actually, the point I was going to make was actually very nicely captured by Jen. Thank you.
I was going to say that sounds to me that some of the issue may have been language, that was used in whatever was distributed to students that maybe that particular parent had some concern. But I'm sure that the administration would, when they have staff meetings, it's more like sensitivity about what you hear in music, right? You might not be able to hand it out in your classroom. And so sometimes it's vernacular, like, oh, we hear it all the time. But I think school's just a place, a safer place to be able to figure out what language to be used, because it's not a criticism, it's just an awareness. Because when parents even make up, oh, that word. But it's, again, just something to figure out. Yeah.
Just to speak to Karen's concern about the science of reading, teaching reading is really complex. But we know through research that students that come from a vocabulary or literacy rich home have a greater capacity to read at an early age. So what you have all done, along with Jan, by expanding our early childhood program and going from 3 to 4 to 6, and having those students in literacy rich environments 10 months out of the year, where there's full of books, full of sound, full of phonics, full of conversation, full of play, where students are being exposed to more and more language at an early age, has been brilliant for us. And making it affordable now for our families in Old Saybrook is even more brilliant. So I have great faith that regardless of where we go with the science of reading and what kind of programs, we are increasing the ability for our students to read just by having them in our schools.
And that speaks to the quality of the educators that we have here. What they bring to the table as professional educators. And there's the two sides of the coin. They need some autonomy to enrich their classrooms in an appropriate way, because anybody can teach out of a program. That's horrible, I shouldn't say that. It's much easier to teach out of. It's much easier to say it's September 10th and we're all on page 32, right? But to read your room, to know your kids, to say they need more of this and they need more of that, that's that autonomy that we want to continue to give our teachers. The other side of the coin is sometimes people will step too far out of the box and we'll have to deal with it.
Any questions? None? Thank you so much. Awesome presentation. Next on our agenda is the approval of HVAC special. Actually, John, we thought you wanted to separate the clock.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
The next on the agenda is the approval of the HVAC specifications for the Kathleen Improvement School and the Ulster Middle School. Julie, Jen.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Julie in a minute, but we want to tell you, we want to throw ourselves on the sword here for a minute. Julie and I asked last minute to have First Selectman Fortuna put us on a Board of Selectmen meeting that just over the weekend I happened to see the agenda come out for, because we're on a very tight timeline to get this grant application in. And we needed the Board of Selectmen to take a series of actions for approval that if we missed this meeting, might have really put us back. So we kind of went out of order and went to the Board of Selectmen first. And the Board of Selectmen unanimously supported all of the things we needed to do so that we could apply for this grant. We told them then, we're going to the Board of Education tonight to bring them up to speed. I apologize, there was just no way to avoid it, and we had to grab the chance, and we were very fortunate that Selectman Fortuna agreed to add it to the already existing agenda. So with that, I will turn it over to Julie, who has been, each one of my central office, our central office administrators is dealing with some sort of craziness that came from the state. Kathy's dealing with CT SEDS, which is the new special ed that is really, we're struggling with. Amity is going to be doing the waiver and and Julie's dealing with this tight timeline on applying for this grant. None of it can be dropped. All of it has to be done. So we are coming to you tonight with an apology and with a request that we can move this forward. So with that, Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
So congratulations, Board of Education. You're now the building committee
You're the
for
building
two
committee.
projects.
I forgot to tell you that. Slide it in.
So, so to Jan's point, the timeline on this is absurd. I don't have any other way to put it to you. In 37 years of facilities and finance work, this is probably the craziest building project grant that I've ever experienced. The amount of information that they want us to submit along with the timeline is just out of the ordinary. So today, as Jan said, there were resolutions that by statute have to be taken by the governing body, which is the Board of Selectmen. And it included essentially these items, which are allowing us, the Board of Education, to apply for this grant, allowing the Board of Education to be the building committee, and then allowing the Board of Education to at least get preliminary specifications on these projects. As well as the fourth one, most importantly, that the town will support the funding of these projects. Now, I say that with a little bit of hesitancy because what the selectmen did today does not by any means bind the town to these funds. We already know that Goodwin School, we're going to apply for 2 grants, Goodwin in the middle school. We already know that Goodwin is completely funded, and we have the various sources, funding sources that will pay for that project, and they've been identified, and they don't need to go to town meeting, and they're all set. So that's great news. Almost $1.8 million worth. The middle school, on the other hand, the Board of Selectmen have till the end of February to bring that to a town meeting, should they be able to fund that project. And if they can't fund it, then no harm, no foul. We've put our grant application in. We tried to get the funding, to get the grant, but if we can't get local funding for the project, then that grant just doesn't become something that is viable for us. So it doesn't hurt us to take these steps and to make these conditions occur. In addition to those resolutions that the Board of Selectmen had to make today, there is a list of things that we had to compile. Just to give you a brief idea, facility study, the long-term capital plan, a copy of our maintenance contracts for our HVAC systems, a statement of the condition of the schools, a narrative of the air quality issues. Fortunately, we participate in Tools for Schools, so we have an annual narrative that I'm including as an upload for this grant. Maintenance records for our current system, a copy of our, audit, project schedules and completions. So we're going to give you this money, and we expect you to have it done by December 2024. Try to find a contractor.
Right.
That's the next challenge. Enrollment projections. I mean, it goes on and on and on with what we've had to compile in a very, very short period of time. Some of the things, thank goodness, we do have, and we have sort of been a little bit ahead of the curve, I think, in talking to some of my colleagues. So educational specifications is a requirement. It's the one thing the board has to take a formal action on. So we have those drawn up for each of the schools. We use the outline that the state provides us and basically plug in some narrative that would pertain to the two projects that we're putting forward. So I'm certainly not going to go through them. They're pretty straightforward. They basically address the fact that we do have buildings that tend to get pretty warm.
Yeah.
And especially at Goodwin in the middle school, they're the two schools that we tend to run more of our summer school programs in. So they're more of a year-round use. And that over time, we have noticed that it becomes difficult for students and staff to be in those buildings. Specifically to the middle school, we talk about the airflow. It's a very different system than Goodwin in the high school, whereby they don't have unit ventilators. They have what you see here. It's continuous radiation. It's heat, but it does not have fresh air exchange. The only fresh air exchange at the middle school was open the window and turn the exhaust fans on. That's how fresh air exchange worked at the middle school during COVID. Whereas at the other two buildings, they have unit ventilators in their classroom, and that brings in fresh air. So when you're putting a system like air conditioning in and you're bringing in 90-degree air outside, you have to be able to cool that air before you dump it into a classroom. The middle school doesn't have the ability to do that through their radiation. So we're recommending something called a chilled beam installation for that school. That would address both the fresh air exchange as well as the cooling component that needs to happen at the middle school. So they're slightly different types of projects. The middle school is a fairly costly project because you do have to have a system that will do both. And so we will see whether or not there's funding that can be put together, and hopefully pieces and parts maybe of that project will get completed, which would be great. So we'll we'll put all these pieces together, but the Board of Education does have to take official approval of these specifications for one for the Goodwin School and one for the middle school.
And if I could just, thank you, Julie, if I could just add a little more context. Remember, we were catching wind of legislation coming on indoor air quality. During COVID, you could hear the conversation building, you could hear the sort of the groundswell from the state, people in the state, communities, parents, that they wanted some sort of standard. I'm on that committee, remember, the Indoor Air Quality Committee that's being, has a number of senators on it. It has indoor air quality experts. It has the Tools for Schools person on it. So it didn't make it through last year, largely because a number of us were concerned that it was unaffordable. But now the governor has made this money available. And so we have to apply for these grants because I do think something will come out of this committee that will create a standard. The standards that they had written last year include statements like any day where it's over blank degrees in the classroom, have to close school down. And all three of our schools will not meet standards. So we started Goodwin trying to be proactive, and now we feel like we just need to keep the pedal to the floor and just keep pushing forward before this gets, before it's at our door and there's no money available. So we want to at least try for this money.
We've been pretty open about, as I said, Goodwin School's 1.8 million, the middle school's upward of 2.5 to 3 million.
Which we
So
didn't expect. That
They
was a
get
shocker.
very, very expensive. And we've heard this from a number of individuals throughout the state. And it's just, that's the reason why they're trying to provide some money, but it's really hard even for a town like ours to come up with, $2.5 million. It's a lot of money.
Right.
Actually, before we get in discussion, I'm gonna be looking for, we'll do each school separately. I'm looking for two separate motions. The first motion, we'll be looking at Goodwin. The second motion, we'll be looking at middle school. So I'm looking
I'd
for
like to make a motion.
the motion.
I'd like to make a motion to move to improve the educational specifications as outlined and presented for the Kathleen E. Goodwin School for the installation of air conditioning.
And second. Discussion on that, questions?
I just have a general question or clarification, and I apologize if you've explained this and I missed it. So are you saying that that the town first has to approve some of the funding before we can apply for the grant?
That's ideally how they would have liked it to happen, but what we did get a little bit more information on most recently in one of the webinars that they held was that they will allow us till the end of February. The grant has to be in December, and when we put the application in, Jan and I will just say, going to town meeting, February 2023. And that may or may not be possible either, so.
So the town votes it down,
Then
Then we don't accept the grant.
Right. We don't have the funding, then we don't. And part of that, I think, is driven by the fact that this money, was federal flow through money, and it's got a timeline associated with it. And so they are just pushing, beyond anything that any of us can imagine.
Okay, thank you.
George, you had a question?
I do. So, I mean, I'll start with the Goodwin because that's what the motion on the floor is. And so it's my understanding, and so that the 1.8 million at this point is fully funded either through the town or ESSA funds, or some variant of that, or also the off budget accounts and so on. And so if we do apply for this grant, and we get some money for Goodwin, can that money, or I guess it would be the town money, basically get reallocated then to the middle school? Is that the intent? Or something like that. And I guess it's just more related question to both of them. My understanding is that the total amount of money that Lamont has promised is about $150 million for the entire state, some ballpark number. And so do you have any idea of how much we might be getting?
So it's based on our normal reimbursement rate, George, and that's about 27.8%. The state does have a very unique way of finding something that is in this project that they say, oh, we're not paying for that. It's not approved. I'll give you an example. So you have to bring piping down from the roof and you come through the ceiling. But when you came through the ceiling, the walls need to be painted. Well, they're not going to paint the wall. They're not going to pay for painting the walls. It's that kind of thing that they end up excluding as you go forward. So figure 25% or so. And in this case, the grant funds we're receiving would not be reimbursable because obviously they're already a grant. So it's about $1 million of the total cost of this project. And so you're looking at $250,000 should we have $1 million worth of reimbursable expenses for this project.
So I'm going to be premature on this. So for the middle school, just quickly do my math then. So the town will be, so our portion would be about 1.8 million on a $2.5 million cost.
Yes. Yeah, because we would, in that case, everything that we submit, again,
Yeah, understood.
they
Yeah,
would considered reimbursable would be eligible for the 25%. Yeah, that's exactly.
that's a big number. Thank you.
There are a number of ways to achieve that. Obviously, the easiest one would say, hey, let's go out and bond. But remember, we do have an HVAC account over on the side that was open this year with, again, this in mind, assuming this was coming. And it might be a question of moving a little bit more slowly, but returning monies to the town and asking for it to be put there so that we can continue these projects over multiple years. Not ideal, but one way to get at it.
And there is $1 million a little over $1 million in the sinking fund. Now that has obviously been earmarked for HVAC, so air conditioning
That's the
was
one I was
part.
talking about, yeah.
Oh, not
sorry.
the 250 that we just gave back? Okay, so that has a lot of other, you know, it has roofs and boilers and other things, but. Sorry, Jane, I thought you were talking
No,
about the
it's
one they
okay,
just
it's okay.
appropriated.
It was two.
Okay, regarding Goodwin, are there any questions regarding Goodwin?
No.
Okay, seeing there's no other questions, I'm gonna call for a vote on the motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? And so moved. Now I'm looking for another motion, please, for the middle school.
So move to approve the educational specifications as outlined and presented for Old Saybrook Middle School for the installation of air conditioning.
Second.
Second by Leah. Discussion, questions? Steve?
You had mentioned regarding putting in a chilled beam system, and I had never heard of that. So I kind of looked it up real quick, and I'm not doubting anything, but it just, one of the things that jumped out at me is says that, bottom line, chilled beams are for sensible cooling only, not dehumidification.
Right,
Isn't one of our concerns at the middle school how humid it gets?
yeah, but obviously when you cool the air, you know, it also takes out the humidity. So none of our systems are dehumidifying systems. That's another whole ballgame, quite honestly. But if you have air conditioning in your home, they're not dehumidifiers, and you know it takes that humidity out of the air. So you accomplish, and we asked this question of our HVAC contractor, and they basically said, if you're air conditioning, you are taking the humidity out. People get really sort of wrapped up in the fact that they think you need both systems and you don't.
So I would only caution us and ask if before we entered into anything with that if we went with somebody who was recommending a chilled beam system, that they put in writing that they guarantee that it will not condense and drip inside the school spaces.
Right, well, all those pipes are insulated, obviously. Yes. Yep. I have actually a whole statement from the contractor that we use pretty often on this exact question, because it was asked quite a while ago as well. Thank you.
Julie, I just have a question. I'm looking at your rationales. You really did a lot of research. And I'm looking at, you know, that the building committee, you were saying that in 1991, that, you know, that they just really didn't take into consideration some things that they should have.
Did I say that exactly?
No. But yeah,
This
that's
was
paraphrasing. I was just like,
Very perceptive of you.
no, just a diplomatic way of saying it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, just some of the, you know, indications just make me think that the people that need to be on the building committee to make sure who's on it, because some of the, you know, reviews, you know, that you were saying was about windows and windows are, I mean.
So they put in a window that technically was for an air conditioned building. They opened from the bottom about 6 inches. So the airflow in that building is horrific. It's horrible. They chose to turn back a little over $1 million when that project was complete, instead of putting the air conditioning in at that time.
They also did the auditorium couldn't really fill all the students in that school either.
Correct.
So you're like, really? So the whole middle school and that's in that auditorium?
Yeah,
There's
it
no room.
can, it can now, but,
Yeah.
but at the time, right. I mean, so there were some really unusual decisions made, for sure.
And also that original building was like constructed to like be like in Hawaii or something.
Well, that was the pods. That's
How-
another,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
different. That's a different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That
Everybody
was
was
before.
doing that then.
Everybody
Yeah.
was exactly. I was like,
No matter what
oh,
district
okay
you're
then. All right.
So my husband attended the middle school, which was the high school at the time, loved the pods. The kids
That's
loved the
neat.
pods. You went outside
Outdoors.
to go to your class, to your
That's
next
right.
class, and then you went outside. There were math, there was a math pod, a science pod, a social studies
All
pod,
outdoors, yeah.
all outdoors. They had a covered walkway, but it was all outside.
Do we have any other questions on the middle school? Yes. Okay, seeing there's no other questions, I'm gonna call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Abstentions? So moved.
Congratulations, building committee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is what we
Pulled
glad
that
you
off.
broke that.
It's not the last you've heard of this project.
Yeah.
Okay, next on our agenda are policy updates. I mean, Jan.
On the agenda, but.
Sure.
We're just looking at it.
Yeah, it's
I know.
on They're both on there. They're both right there.
Maybe that's the one. Different one I was looking at.
Oh, so
I looked at it too. Perfect.
So this is no surprise to the board because this is exactly what you discussed at your last meeting. We had approved both of these policies because there were amendments to them. And then while Attorney Littlefield was here, you workshopped the language of minor changes that you wanted to make to Series 9000 meeting conduct. You can see it's there. The Board of Education does not. You remove the word typically, because you wanted to reflect your actions, your behavior, respond to specific questions during the course of public address. And so all in blue has been added, all in red has been stricken, right? And then the other one is construction and posting of agenda. I asked that we change if you want to put a new topic on no later than 72 hours, I asked for 4 business days because that's helpful to Trent as he's constructing the agenda. 72 hours can include a weekend. And then we're finding out way too late that we've got to make changes.
I was gonna say, so then when you read, the way the audience of citizens participates, you were saying, you're gonna read that new language so that they're not like, is anybody gonna answer the question or something, correct?
Right, that'll be part of the
I'm
new
just saying
policy.
that.
Yep.
Part of that.
Okay, so before we get into questions, I'm looking for a motion.
You moving?
Yeah, that waited to be called on. Move to adopt policy updates as presented.
Second by Jim Anderson.
Jim,
Discussion, questions? No questions. Okay, seeing there's no other questions, call for a vote. All those in favor of the new policy updates? Aye. Aye. All those opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so moved. Last 2 items on the agenda, we have job description update.
Right, so as you know, we are going to beginning the interview process for both the Director of Curriculum Instruction Assessment and the Director of, currently People Personnel. So I always take that opportunity to sit with the person and ask them what has changed about your job. Look at what is currently considered the best type of job description for that type of job. And I did that activity with both Anthony Goss and Kathy Bai. So the first one we're going to look at, and we don't need to vote on this. I just want to make you aware of it. So I wanted you to see the changes. Anything, again, we're using the same language, the same process we use for policy. Anything that is stricken in red is being removed. Anything in blue is being added. The Director of Curriculum position, the title stays the same. Much of the top half stays the same. But as you might imagine, since this was written in 2014 or 13 or something, things have changed. And things have changed because of, the existing team, the way the work has changed. And they just did a little presentation tonight about how much more comes from the state. And so we've captured all that here, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have about it.
Just maybe semantics, but at the very top, you change it to minimum of 3 years of successful professional experience as a leader in education.
Right.
And maybe I'm just not, firms are in education, but when we classify as a leader.
So the leader might be the typical administrative role, like someone's been a building principal, they've been a director. They might also be someone who has led, so a department chair in a large district can be, a pretty big job. So we'd be looking for some experience in leadership, at least 3 years experience in leadership, as well as, teaching experience, obviously. And if there are no other,
I'm sorry, Jim.
Just to follow up on Steve's question
Yeah.
and another one, but
So leader is not, say, an industry defined term within the education society. It's just sort of what we generally know to be a leader in terms of leading meetings, leading groups to a certain goal.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, coaching or evaluating would be part of that, supervising.
Advanced responsibilities.
Right, right.
Okay. And with respect to the Director of Student Services,
Oh, wait, yep, ready, hang on.
Wait, can I ask a question?
Yep.
What's oversee the team program? What's the acronym team?
Oh, goodness.
Could we, should we, I'd rather, can we spell that out?
Well,
It's mentored.
it's the new teacher mentoring program. I've been using team for so long.
It's been
Teacher entry, it's, I don't know, I'm making
So
it up.
everybody knows.
Teacher,
Yeah,
everybody
it's-
knows
it's
it.
all-
I don't think I've ever heard it said.
No.
It's never really.
You don't mean acronyms. I'm not saying acronyms.
No,
You guys all
yes.
know what you're talking
We
about.
all know.
Okay.
Shall I go on to the next one? And then I know Jim has a question on that one.
Understand.
So this one again, the Director of Pupil and Professional Services is.
Teacher education
is-
and mentoring.
Thank you, Krista.
Thank you.
Good job, Krista.
It's in my
Um,
dissertation.
Thank you.
I feel
know
better
it,
now.
right?
You should know it, and you had to look it up too. No, it was 12 years ago.
So we changed Director of Pupil and Professional Services. Kathy Bai recommends changing it Director of Student Services. Most of her colleagues in the business are using that term now. It is much more concise and
Yeah.
more understandable than of pupil and professional services. It has also a curriculum sound to it. And at one time, actually, these positions were more blended than they are now. So anything that was specifically curriculum related, we are removing. And anything that is, antiquated, no longer exists, we are removing. Remember, you always have the safeguard at the end where it says perform such other duties as may be delegated by the superintendent, and everybody's job description says that. So you always have that. So if things change, you don't have to write a whole new job description. So she has really made this up to date. She and I met about it. She asked if I needed her here tonight. I said, no, I thought I could answer any questions that you have, and I can always go back to her if I can't.
I appreciate it. This isn't new, but I'm glad to see the one that says monitor the progress of All Saber students who are placed externally. And that's important so that the district knows how they're doing, if they can be returned to district, because that's very, costly in terms of transportation. That I'm totally for appropriate placement. And it's just good to kind of know how many students are out there, and sometimes it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. I'm here, but
Just question, we're getting rid of is responsible for a system-wide student record system, but is still act as the designated custodian of records. So if they're gonna be the designated custodian of records, who's responsible for a system-wide student record system?
The system-wide student record system is now all electronics or IT department. She is the person, she's the person who's responsible for maintaining records, the student files, what we call the C files. She's the one who, even after kids graduate, is the custodian of record, and so she has the locked files. But the actual IT department, so run by Mike Gardner, runs the system-wide system. We weren't even sure what the heck that meant, quite honestly, but it's all electronic now, and it's all tied into the state. And so information is passed back and forth between our software system and PowerSchool and the state itself.
So what records is she being a custodian of?
So she has to keep.
Or he, for the future?
Or the person has to keep the fact that the person graduated, any final special education records for a period of time. Anybody remember?
6 years.
6 years. Thank you. I think that's the only thing you're absolutely required to keep once they leave. Those are the
Health
I believe
records.
And health records.
Yeah,
right.
50 years.
Yeah.
So is that done through a different system than what the IT is maintaining?
So yes, that's actually still paper, which we're now talking about maybe putting on microfilm or microfiche because we're running out of room. Yeah, and that is still something that she keeps the records for, also things like DCF referrals, those are all locked up in the Director of Student Services office or adjacent fireproof file cabinet. Your choices are fireproof file cabinets or sprinklered rooms. Yeah, so very different. I think that the powers that the IT department does the day-to-day operational piece. So that'll include the attendance, the grades, all of that. The transcripts really are generated from there, but then we do have to keep those official files, and the state documentation system really hasn't completely caught up to the fact that most things are electronic now, so we still do keep paper.
George, did you still have a question, George?
No, I'm good.
Hands up, there you go.
Hands down.
Alan?
So the second to last bullet, it's just conducting annual needs study. So what was that replaced by something, or does that become?
That was very curriculum
I
oriented.
was gonna
That's
say,
a curriculum person.
Does that fall under curriculum now?
Yeah, so the curriculum person does, we tie our goals to what we've identified as learning needs for staff.
Understood.
Another question, maybe it's just the dissemination of responsibility. So does each school have an individual in special education that chairs the PPTs? Because it says chair, they cross that out.
So you have to have an administrator as the chair of every PPT. Sometimes it is the director of student services, but sometimes it is the administrator. And that's everything. I just wanted you to be aware of it because you'll be seeing it come forward, whether or not you're involved in the interview process, and a number of board members will be. Dan and I already met about the process for the director of curriculum position. You will see these candidates come forward, and as part of the packet, you'll see the job description. I wanted you to know what changes were being made to it. That's everything.
Thank you.
Now we have an audience.
Yeah, the last item we have are the audience and citizens. Trent, do we have anybody waiting at the board?
We do have one audience member. If he has a question, he can raise his hand and we can turn on his mic. If not, we can move on. It's like,
There's no hand up?
No.
oh, there's no hand up. Actually, it looks like this person maybe is gone.
Okay.
Gone?
No, their name's not
There's
there.
no audience and citizens. We'll move past that. And looking at the reminders of the agenda, please.
So I make the motion to adjourn.
Look at the reminders.
No, I don't.
Okay. Questions about anything on the agenda? So I am looking for a motion. Sure. Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?